Have you ever noticed how some people seem to hold a strange, almost supernatural power over their surroundings? Not through loudness, demands, or force, but simply through their absence. They don't argue, they don't beg, and they don't chase. They just withdraw. And somehow, without saying a word, everything begins to shift. The energy changes. People start to question themselves, feel unsettled, even chase after them. Now imagine if you did the same. If you stopped reacting immediately to every emotion, every message, every expectation. If you chose silence over defensiveness, retreat over confrontation, what would happen? That's the moment your life would begin to change. Because the real game starts the day you stop being emotionally predictable. When you withdraw your availability, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, psychologically, the world around you goes into crisis. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because people can no longer manipulate you through your reactions. They're used to your yes, to your explanations, your impulse to please. But when that pattern breaks, they realize they never truly knew who you were at all. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And when your silence begins to irritate people, it reveals more about them than it does about you. Who gets anxious when you don't respond? Who tries to provoke you when you remain calm? Who accuses you of being distant when you're simply choosing peace? These are not just people reacting. They are revealing how deeply they were relying on your emotional availability to maintain their own control. And yet, despite all this, you continue to give. You respond to messages when you're tired. You say yes to things you dread. You show up for people who vanish the moment they no longer need you. You do it to keep peace, to feel loved, to not lose connections. But every time you do, you give away a piece of your energy. And what's left after that? Tiredness, emptiness, a frustration you can't explain. That's because you're giving too much of yourself to those who haven't earned even a minute of your silence. This message isn't about turning your back on the world. It's about returning to yourself. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, real, complete. And this process begins not by adding more to your life, but by subtracting what drains you. It begins when you understand that silence can be stronger than 1,000 words, and that stepping back isn't weakness, it's power. When your absence starts to unsettle people more than your presence ever did, that's when you know you've stepped into your truth. So I ask you now, with sincerity, how long will you continue being controlled by the emotional chaos of others? How long will you let your reactions be dictated by their expectations, their wounds, their games? Maybe it's time to stop being available, to become a mystery, to reclaim your energy, your space, yourself. What most people don't realize is that your emotional reactivity is the easiest way to control you. Every time you feel the need to explain, to defend, to prove yourself, you are giving someone access to your internal world. Carl Jung didn't see the human psyche as just a machine that reacts to life. He saw it as an energy system, complex, delicate, and deeply interconnected. Every thought, every emotion, every action draws from your limited store of psychic energy. The question is, are you spending this energy consciously, or are you handing it out freely to people and situations that give you nothing in return? When you defend yourself against an undeserved criticism, when you respond to someone's passive-aggressive comment just to feel heard, when you dive into conversations that leave you drained, you are not just losing time, you're bleeding energy. You think you're being strong, being present, being kind, but what you're really doing is emptying yourself for people who would never do the same for you. And here's the deeper truth. That which you resist persists. The more you react, the more you stay entangled. People who are constantly tired, emotionally depleted, and mentally scattered are not broken. They're misdirected. Their energy is being spent on keeping toxic cycles alive. Jung understood this better than most. He believed that a healthy psyche is one that knows how to hold energy within itself. That means being able to say no without guilt, to remain silent without shame, to walk away without feeling like you failed. This is not about coldness, it's about conservation, because true power does not lie in how much you respond. It lies in your ability to choose when and how you act. But how many of us actually live this way? How many of us lose sleep over what we didn't say in a conversation that should have ended long ago? How often do we replay arguments in our heads, trying to craft the perfect comeback for people who no longer deserve our attention? This is the cost of not guarding your energy. You keep ghosts alive, ghosts of betrayal, of unmet expectations, of past emotional games. You feed dynamics that only survive because you keep reacting. But when you begin to protect your energy, something changes. You walk into a room and people feel your presence, not because you speak louder, but because you've learned to speak less. This isn't invisibility, it's strength, a strength that makes you untouchable. But for that, you must start observing your own triggers. What makes you feel the need to prove yourself? What makes you argue, defend, explain? These are not just reactions, they are leaks. And until you become aware of where your energy escapes, you will always feel like you're running on empty, no matter how much you rest or recharge. Most people think manipulation is loud, aggressive, or obvious, but the most dangerous form is silent. It hides in guilt, in the feeling that you owe others your time, your care, your emotional labor, and it thrives when you're emotionally available all the time. The truth is, many of the people in your life are not connected to who you are. They're connected to the version of you that constantly serves them. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, loved, and needed. And for many of us, that mask is made of self-abandonment. We say it's okay when we are suffocating inside. We reply instantly to messages even when we are exhausted. We explain, justify, and defend ourselves to avoid discomfort, just to hold on to relationships built on illusion. But the moment you remove that mask, the moment you stop reacting, the manipulator's power begins to collapse. Not because you attacked them, but because you stopped being useful to their emotional script. People who only reach out in crisis, who praise you only when you're convenient, or who provoke you just to get a reaction, they aren't connecting with you. They're using you to fill a void. And the reason you keep playing along is fear. Fear of being unloved, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of losing your place in someone's life. But here's what you must understand. The person who depends on your availability to function isn't relating to your soul. They're relating to the role you've agreed to play. And the most effective manipulation never forces you. It just waits for your pattern. It waits for your need to respond, to explain, to fix. The moment you stop doing that, the game ends. When you say no without guilt, when you offer silence instead of reaction, when you walk away instead of explaining yourself for the 100th time, that's when the mask breaks. And that's when their projections collapse. Because they no longer recognize you. Not because you changed, but because you stopped letting yourself be defined by their needs. In today's world, silence is misunderstood. It's seen as weakness, as avoidance, as something to be broken. We live in a culture obsessed with constant connection, instant replies, and never-ending dialogue. But Carl Jung understood silence differently. For him, silence was not absence. It was presence in its most powerful form. It was the space where truth emerges, where the unconscious begins to speak. When you stop reacting, when you withhold your need to prove, fix, or please, you don't disappear. You become amplified. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects not just others, but yourself. You begin to notice things you once ignored. The manipulation, the repetition, the toxic cycles that keep draining you. Silence makes these patterns visible because silence slows the chaos. It disrupts the autopilot and awakens your awareness. True silence is not passive. It is not cowardice or escape. It is restraint. It is a deliberate choice to not invest energy where there is no growth. When you stop speaking just to be heard, when you stop responding just to keep the peace, you start listening to yourself. And in that listening, clarity begins to form. You begin to realize that not every invitation to argue deserves an RSVP, that not every question needs an answer, that not every accusation requires a defense. You learn to be okay with discomfort, with people misunderstanding you, even with being called distant or cold, because now you understand something deeper. Every word is an energetic investment, and not everyone is worth the cost. Once you stop being available to everyone, something deep begins to happen. At first, there's a strange silence. It might feel uncomfortable, even scary. You may wonder, did I do the right thing? Am I being too harsh? Am I pushing people away? But give it time. That silence is not your enemy. It's your healing space. Slowly, the noise fades. The stress fades. You begin to feel lighter. You notice that you're not checking your phone as often. You're not replaying conversations in your head. You're not waiting for someone else's message to decide your mood. That silence that once felt like a void starts to feel like peace. Then comes solitude. But this isn't the kind of loneliness that hurts. This is solitude with yourself. You begin to feel your own presence more clearly. You're not distracted by everyone else's opinions, moods, or expectations. You feel calm, whole, present. And that's when you start realizing something powerful. You never needed all those conversations, all those approvals, all that noise. You just needed you, your peace, your voice, your space. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said that becoming your true self often means stepping away from the crowd, not forever, but long enough to hear your own truth. And yes, this path will cost you some people. Some will fall away. Some will call you distant or selfish. But don't confuse their reaction with your mistake. What you're losing isn't love. It's dependency, control, emotional pressure. And what you're gaining is worth everything. You're gaining clarity, confidence, a life built on your terms. Because when you stop being available for everything, you become valuable for the right things. You're no longer someone people can just use for comfort or distraction. You become someone they must respect to access. When you stop being emotionally available to everyone, a quiet kind of loneliness shows up. It's not loud, it doesn't scream, but it sits with you. At first, it may feel like you've lost something important. People, connections, conversations. You might feel guilty. You might wonder if you've made a mistake. But slowly, something beautiful starts to happen. That loneliness becomes space. Space to breathe, to think, to feel without judgment. It becomes a place where you no longer have to pretend, explain, or perform. This kind of loneliness is not a punishment. It's growth. It means you've stopped betraying yourself just to keep others close. Carl Jung called this part of the journey individuation, the process of becoming your true self. And one of the signs that you're growing is that you begin to feel a little more alone, not because you are unlovable, but because you're no longer willing to be used. You've raised your standards, you've created boundaries, and that scares people who were used to crossing them. But after that loneliness comes freedom, real, deep, lasting freedom. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer tired from giving too much. You're no longer waiting for people to understand you or validate your worth. You stop chasing love, approval, or attention, because now you've found those things within yourself. And here's the powerful truth. When you become unavailable for chaos, for drama, for emotional manipulation, you become available for peace, purpose, and genuine connection. Not everyone will join you on this path, and that's fine. What matters is that you have chosen you. That's where your new life begins.